Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the Sixers, CBS Sports. And, of course, you can check him out at The Real Mike KB on Twitter. And he joins us now on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Lot to discuss. What's going on, MKB?
What's up, fellas? Good to talk to you.
Yeah, man. Well, same old story, same old song and dance, eh? Here we are about halfway through this NBA season. Sixers 25-16, 7-14 on the road, 6 straight road losses. Number one, let's start with the road stuff. What is the issue on the road? They are 18-2 at home, 7-14 on the road. What is a discernible difference that is a concern and or fixable?
I think the main issue with the road struggles, Mike, is just their lack of a closer. I think at home, they're able to play consistently better, which, is the case with a lot of teams. And, it gets down to the stretch of these close games where at home they're able to feed off the crowd a little bit and kind of use a team approach. On the road, they just don't have a guy that they can consistently rely on to get them tough buckets in crunch time. They gave 3 guys basically max money over this summer, talking Tobias, Al, and Ben. And none of those 3 guys you can rely on consistently in like the closing minutes of a game. Just give the ball to an ISO and get a basket for the team. And I think without a clear-cut guy to make plays for them, the offense obviously was lost and doesn't necessarily have an identity like you guys were just talking about before I hopped on.
All right, so let's go to Simmons then, because obviously he is Ben. Do we feel that Ben? This is Ben. Is there more of Ben? Are we going to get a different Ben at some point? Or 3-4 years down the line, is this the Ben Simmons we're getting?
I think there's definitely room for improvement, Mike. I don't know if he's ever going to improve to the level that, I think a lot of people hoped that, maybe he would be in terms of a top 3, top 5 player in the league. Obviously, it's tough because he came in at the league at doing so many things well at such a high level, and it seems like, he's basically kind of stayed at that level, which is, like I said, obviously already a very high level. But, obviously the only thing he needs to add is that shot. This season he's given us no indication really other than a couple wide open threes that he took that it's, going to be integrated into a part of his game. I'm optimistic that slowly and surely over the next few years it'll be, added piece by piece. And, it seems like he's a little more ready to take, the turnaround fadeaways from like 10, 15 feet. They're not really going in. But, I think in general, waiting for Ben to turn into something else, especially for the Sixers and their timetable, is not the way to go. You either have to accept who he is and build around him, the skills that he has, or, look to do something else with him down the road.
MKB, what role does Brett Brown play in all of this?
I think he plays a pretty big part of it, Ryan. Obviously, I think, as you guys know, I've been a big Brett supporter, over the years. But I do think there's something to be said about obviously the road play and the play down the stretch, and his the roster, the rotations that he makes has me scratching my head. I do think more of the blame, again, not to absolve Brett of any issues. I do think a lot of the issues that this team has is roster construction. How much Brett played a hand in that over the off season. We don't really know. Obviously, Elton was the man making the final moves, but you have to think Brett was involved in it. But this team had clear issues that we all talked about prior to the season. Do they have enough shooting? Do they have enough perimeter shot creation and playmaking? And it turns out that they don't. And I think that in a league today where there's so much emphasis placed on pace and space and the ability to shoot and create from the perimeter, the Sixers went in a completely opposite direction, and it was either going to go one of 2 ways where it was so different that no one could really match up with it, and they developed a style that was unique and they were good at it. That was obviously the best case scenario. That hasn't quite happened. So instead, they're in a situation where they're kind of mismatched in the league today, where they don't have a lot of the players that would benefit how they want to play. I do think the main criticism I have with Brett too is that he's obviously, quote unquote, hunting threes, but the team we saw last night, there's too many games where they're shooting 6 for 30, 7 for 29 from 3. And I think at one point or another, you got to alter the game plan if the personnel is not working to fit the game plan. So, I do think there's definitely some blame to go with Brett, but I think a lot of it is also, this falls into the roster construction issue.
What about Brett Brown's role with Ben Simmons? Because that story has been a little bit all over the place this season. Brett comes out after the Cleveland game and says, I'm paraphrasing, I demand 1-3 a game moving forward. There's been reports that the coaching staff and Brett Brown have been trying to hold him accountable, him being Ben, but it's not working. So what can you make of all that?
I think, I don't know for a fact. I think Brett would take that back if he could, and I think that was a mistake on his part to, if you want to say challenge Ben publicly like that. I think that's obviously, something that, if he wanted to see done, which they do, like you said, Ryan, they're working behind the scenes. This is something, Brett's been working with Ben on his shot. And if you go to Sixers practice or before games, I mean, he takes his shots. It's at this point, he knows that people want him to shoot. It's in Ben. The ball literally is in Ben's court now in terms of when he's going to start adapting. There's only so much. Brett wants him to shoot. They work with him to shoot in practice. I just think that him saying it publicly was a mistake because it gave national media a hitting point to be like, is there an issue? Brett said this, and Ben's not doing it, so clearly he must not respect Brett as a coach. Or I don't think that's the situation at all. I think it's just an area where Brett or Ben still is not comfortable, and a public kind of prodding like that isn't going to be in my mind the way to get it done. So I think that there's obviously something that they're working on there, but I do think that Brett probably would have taken that public thing back if he could have.
Yeah, I agree. I think he immediately regretted that decision. So Elton Brand, now we want him fired. I'm exaggerating, and I'm not saying you, but we were praising him for Executive of the Year last year. We praised him for the offseason moves that he made, and now it seems like we're all taking a step back. Like, wait a second, is this going to work? So what are your thoughts on how the roster is built? Is a trade necessary? Another roster overhaul and another new addition to incorporate? I mean, how do you piece all of that together?
That's, obviously that's a great question, Ryan. I don't think I would be pretty surprised if they pulled the plug on the starting five this season. Brett has said, he told us time and again that this team is, quote unquote, built for the playoffs. They're made for postseason ball. And, obviously they're playing poorly now, but there have been some high points. They're 3-0 against the Celtics, who are the 2 seed in the East. They're, undefeated 1-0 only against the Bucks with that huge Christmas Day win. So I think there's still some optimism within the franchise that, get this team the playoffs healthy regardless of seeding at this point. And, they could contend with anyone in the East still. I think that's still a prevailing thought within the organization. So I do think they'll make moves at the deadline, absolutely, but I don't think that it'll be, a blockbuster move involving, let's say Al or, Tobias or Josh or anything like that. I think, if we get through the postseason again, another, what if they lose in the first round or the second, if they don't progress past the second round, at that point, I think anything's on the table. But in the short term, I think any moves that they do make will be, moves to shore up the rotation. Mike Scott should not be the guy that's starting in place of Joel. They need a couple more shooters and guys that can create for themselves off the bench. Future picks, I think will be on the table. Zaire, pretty much anyone on the bench outside of Matisse. But to circle back to the Elton thing, I do think, there was a lot of questions about the Al Horford signing, when it happened. I know I was certainly somewhat skeptical of it, especially when you talk about the number of years of it. And I think that it's really fair to question, it was, a move that made you scratch your head at the time. It kind of made sense in terms of him being able to step in for Joel, but to pay, if you're going to really tout him as a backup to Joel, to pay him that much and for the fit to be questionable, I think that's probably the biggest issue. You think you need to look at it elsewhere to better complement your 2 best players in Ben and Joel. I think the Sixers are a little bit better right now. So, the heat is definitely on Elton to fix this in the short term. And if he's unable to do anything to move the needle of this trade deadline, I think come this summer, his job security could be a question, as most of the players on the roster.
Well, where's your stance on? You've kind of hinted at it a little bit, but that look, a guy like Horford was brought here with the Antetokounmpo in mind and beating the Bucks. Like, yeah, we might look clunky and try to fist fight our way through the East, But once we get to Milwaukee, that's where this team was built for.
Yeah, Mike, and I think that's the reason why internally there's not necessarily as much panic as there might be that you see on Twitter from the fan base. I mean, obviously there's concerns about how they're playing on the road because no matter what in the playoffs, if you want to advance, you're going to have to win some games on the road. So I do think that that's an issue. But overall, I think that, I know Brett feels this way, and, I haven't spoken to Elton personally, but just based off things I've heard, I do think they still feel, like you said, basically, they handled the Bucks on Christmas Day. Obviously that was in Philly, but they looked really like a solid matchup against Milwaukee. They had a bunch of guys to throw at Giannis. Ben did a good job. Al, they threw Mike on him for a couple possessions. Joel obviously played great defense on him. And they're 3-0 against the Celtics. I think they feel like they match up against the Raptors this year too. So I do think that that's, still the undercurrent of the organization that, they're, this season they're still trying to figure things out. But ultimately, obviously this, it depends on Joel's health, and that's the main thing. But if you, like I said, if they get them to the postseason healthy, whether they're the 2 seed, the 4 seed, the 6 seed, I think that they think that, they can match up with pretty much anyone in the conference.
Yeah, Michael Kaskey-Blomain's with us. CBS Sports covers the Sixers in the NBA. We saw the Sixers without Joel at home one night, and they looked pretty good, and people were like, see, floor spacing and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden it came crashing back down. What are some of the biggest losses this team is having trouble with without Joel?
I mean, the first thing I think that goes to me is just paint protection. Al he's still a solid defender, one-on-one in the post, but in terms of just protecting the paint, being able to come over, if a guard penetrates, it's just not there. And when Joel's there, he generates so much offense for the Sixers, even though, you tend to think they play faster without him, and with Ben on the floor, his ability to block shots or alter shots and then get defensive rebounds and spark breaks for the Sixers is huge. And I think you're missing that. You're just seeing Al, he's never been the quickest player in the league, on his feet. And now, obviously, at 33, I think he looks, expectedly a step slower than he was in his prime. And I think that's been an issue. Pell looks all right, obviously, when he's in there, but it's short stint, and he's, obviously super inexperienced. So I think defensively is the main drop-off. And then offensively, obviously, Joel's the guy that he still makes a lot of careless errors in the post, but if, in terms of the Sixers' best options is go and get a bucket or draw a foul in the clutch of the game, it's still Joel. And, you don't have him in there.
Right.
And then you're struggling, and you're going to give it to Josh, basically like they were doing last night. You're going to run down screens for Tobias. You're going to try to get Ben going to the basket. And I think they just struggle without a clear-cut option when Joel's out.
So let me ask you this then. The night against Boston in Philly a couple nights ago, why did everything kind of look like, like Joel's not here and this looks good? And then last night against Indiana, I mean, you had Simmons and Horford running into each other. I mean, it looked like a completely different team than the one that was at home against Boston, same personnel.
Yeah, and
I preface this by saying, Michael, that Embiid being out, we figured, okay, that's going to help Horford look more comfortable. And my point was, that's great for Horford to look more comfortable without Embiid, but you're not going to have him without Embiid. So you're playing him in a role that he's going to maybe excel in for the short term, but then have to go back to his former role in the long term. So it seemed like that night against Boston, he was kind of like, okay, look, I can do things. And now he's right back to kind of looking clunky again.
Yeah, Mike, I totally agree. And I actually touched on that recently in an article basically saying that, it's an opportunity for Al, but no matter what, he's going to have to recalibrate again when Joel comes back. So, best scenario is he could help them win some regular season games. But the like you said, the clunky fit, it's going to return as soon as Joel returns to the lineup. So, I think, like you said, the one night they looked great against Boston, and then they dropped two straight on the road. And I think that's probably just the main thing that's bothering people with this team this year. It's the inconsistency, and it's obviously really to point down the line of being home and away. But I think, there's, at least from, my general watching, there's not a direct explanation for it a lot of times. And I think Brett himself is even lost for an answer sometimes is why, even in the game like last night, how they could look, really good in the first half. And so poorly in the second half, same as the Dallas game over the weekend. it seems like it's just spouts of this team, and obviously shooting ties into it a lot. The Boston game, they were making some of their shots, and last night the Dallas game they weren't. And when they're not making the shots and they're shooting, 30, 35 of them a game, that's a recipe for disaster. So, I don't have an answer for it, but inconsistency, as kind of just a vague term, is probably the most frustrating thing about this team.
What's going to be the number one fix on the floor for you? That's doable. So not Ben Simmons becoming Reggie Miller, or not, anything that we're hoping for development-wise for certain individuals. But if you're
Right.
Brett Brown, MKB, what's a fixable adjustment or personnel decision that he can make to maybe make things a little bit more smooth?
And that's not including any talk currently constructed.
Yes.
That's a great question, Ryan. And I think, it's tough considering how much money you coughed up to him. And, obviously this is when Joel returns. And in the short term, Al's going to, be in the starting lineup. But I would really think about moving Al to the bench and sliding in, whether it's James Ennis or Trey Burke or, even Matisse into that starting spot for Al. And then just to, have an opportunity to have a better chance in a short-term offense. In that situation, you could still have Ben, running the break, but in the short term, you can kind of slide him down to the 4 spot and let, Trey Burke run the offense. And it just gives you another natural floor spacer. Al can shoot the 3, but he's not comfortable out there. It's not, he's not a guy that you necessarily want to spread the floor with. So, I think that will minimize the time him and Joel spend on the floor together, obviously, which, hasn't been great. Lets Al man the center spot for a longer period of time, which is his natural position. It's what he played in Boston a lot. It's what he, in today's NBA, frankly, that's just what he is. He's a 5 in the way the game's played today. So I would think about doing that if I were Brett, shifting him to the bench, moving either Tobias to the 4, or, technically if you want to say Ben could be the 4 and you bring in Trey Burke and put him at point.
Why did Trey Burke play 4 minutes last night?
See, that's, again, Mike, that's probably one of my biggest gripes with Brett this season. The rotations, he's always kind of a caveat for the rotations because there's always been turnover, there's always been injuries, and that, that's not necessarily different this season. But he rolls out some stuff that I just don't understand. Like, I thought he waited too long in the season in general to get Trey Burke going. I thought he's been playing well. Randomly Neto's in last night. There's just rotations that I don't always understand, and I think that's one of my bigger gripes with Brett so far this season too.
Where do you put Brett on the pantheon of issues with this team? Like, is he a big issue, or is he lower down your list? There's this war, this social media war between the Brett Brown haters and the people, that like. I mean, someone like me.
There's not many supporters.
Right. I just don't care. Like, I don't think he's
Twitter.
Good, bad, and different. Like, to me, this is a players' league, and the talent wins out. I don't know. Brett's low on my list. Is he moving up your list? Where is he on your list of this team's issues?
He's higher than he's been in past years, for sure. I will say that he's not at the top for me. Like I said, I think there's only so much you can do with the roster construction when he can't make the threes for the team. He can't go out there and stand behind Ben and physically force him to shoot the ball. I think there's limited amounts of things he can do, and obviously as a fan base, the most tangible thing you can call for is either a player being traded or a coach being fired. So I think that that's a lot of ear there. But I do think that for there is a lot of questions about how he's kind of running the team, and I do tend to agree. I see you on Twitter a lot, Mike, was saying that it's a players' league, and I agree. Like, Steve Kerr is not suddenly a terrible coach this season when he was a great coach for the past 5 seasons. Like, it does depend on who's out there, and I think that just because there's a lot of talent on the Sixers roster, he's not automatically able to just make it work. But I do think that there's some legitimate questions, especially, he's not going to get canned during the season. At least I don't think. I would be very shocked if, he doesn't last through the playoffs at least. But, if they fail to make it further than they have, at that point, I think it's fair. But in the short term, you always have to evaluate replacement options too. It's not like there's a line of, talented coaches waiting to just take over a team midseason to, elevate them to the finals. So, I think Brett, he's definitely not, without, his own faults this season, but he's not the top even 3 or 4 issues with the team in my mind.
And no James Ennis last night either. All of a sudden, he
that was
fell
weird.
out of favor.
Yeah, that's also strange to me because James has been probably, I mean, he hasn't been great, but in terms of their bench player, he's been probably the most consistent guy throughout the season. You know what you're going to get with him. So if I'm Brett, he's, one of the first guys I'm going to.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain, of course, you can follow him on Twitter at The Real Mike KB from CBS Sports, covers the Sixers in the NBA. And, of course, like all guests, he appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. Now, before we run here, I'll ask you this. Is target name that intrigues you?
Yeah, Mike, I think there's definitely a few, realistic ones. Vance from Washington is one that's been thrown around as a guy that can just come in and plug in and knock down shots. Joe Harris from the Nets is a similar one. Obviously, I don't know if Brooklyn would want to give him up. Mainly, shooters Reggie Bullock from New York. And, Derrick Rose is a guy that intrigues me as a, backup point guard that could just come in and get a bucket for the team. And when a lot of times when a team's there, 3-4 minute spans go where they're not getting a field goal, Derrick's, he's not a shooter. So the question with Ben would be, how would the fit go? But in terms of a guy that can just get you a bucket in the half court, he would be a nice addition. So I'm definitely looking for Elton to make some serious upgrades to the bench at least by the deadline.
All right, and there's always the former Sixers. You got Dario, who's out of the rotation in Phoenix. You got Covington. You got Redick. So it's going to be an interesting trade deadline for Elton Brand. See what he does. And then there's a big name like Chris Paul. Like, do you do something major like that? All things intriguing as the trade deadline about 3 weeks away. And, of course, we'll have you covered here on the Sports Bash. The Real Mike KB on Twitter. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, fellas. Great talking to you.
Yeah, bud.
Thanks, man.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain here on the Sports Bash.